The year 1881 settled heavily over the land near the Montana-Canada border, bringing with it a winter fiercer than any folks had seen in a long while. Snow fell for days, not in gentle flurries, but in thick, blinding sheets that piled higher than a man's head. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, tearing at the windows of the small cabin where Alara and her husband, Thomas, huddled together. Thomas, a man built for hard work, had ventured out just before the blizzard hit full force, hoping to check on their meager livestock. He promised to be back before nightfall, his smile a warm comfort against the growing chill. But night came, and then another, and still Thomas did not return. Alara watched the swirling white world outside, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. She stoked the fire, prayed whispered words into the flickering flames, and tried to keep hope alive, but the biting cold seeped into everything. On the third day, the storm finally began to lose its fury, leaving behind a world buried deep in white. Alara, bundled in every spare blanket, pushed open the creaking door. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of her boots on the frozen snow. She searched for hours, calling Thomas's name until her throat was raw. It was near the frozen creek, half buried under a drift, that she found him. His face was peaceful, as if asleep, but his skin was cold as ice. The blizzard had claimed him, leaving Alara utterly alone in a vast, unforgiving wilderness. The grief hit her like another storm, a cold, dark wave washing over her in the desolate quiet. The funeral for Thomas was a quiet, cold affair. The few folks from the nearby settlement of Haven came, their faces pinched with sorrow and the lingering chill of the blizzard. They offered Alara hushed words of comfort, but their eyes held a strange mix of pity and something else she couldn't quite name. It felt like a shiver running down her spine, even in the warmth of their shared grief. As days turned into weeks, the whispers began. At first, they were soft like the rustle of dry leaves, carried on the wind through the small, snowbound community. It's odd, someone might say. Thomas was so strong, a man of the land. How could he fall to the cold when his wife, smaller and softer, survived? Then another voice would add, she wasn't even sick, not a cough, not a shiver after days alone in that cabin. Alara heard snippets when she went to the general store for supplies. A woman quickly pulling her child closer as Alara passed. A group of men stopping their talk when she entered, their gazes quick and wary. The pity in their eyes had changed, replaced by suspicion. The fear of the blizzard, the sorrow for lost lives, had twisted into something ugly. How could a woman survive such a storm when a robust man like Thomas did not? To their simple, scared minds, there could only be one answer. She must have made a pact. An old woman muttered loudly enough for Alara to hear one afternoon, her voice raspy with age and certainty. Only dark magic could save one and take the other. The word which hung in the air like a curse, unspoken yet clearly understood. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. The town, gripped by fear and old beliefs, was starting to look at her not as a grieving widow, but as something unnatural, something to be feared. The whispers soon grew into a roar. It wasn't long before they reached the ears of Silas Blackwood, the unofficial leader of Haven. Silas was a man hardened by the wilderness, but also deeply rooted in the old ways, believing in signs and omens, and quick to fear what he didn't understand. The blizzard had taken his own brother, and his grief made him even more eager to find someone to blame. One cold afternoon, a small group of townsfolk, their faces grim and set, marched to Alara's cabin. Silas Blackwood stood at the front, his heavy coat making him seem larger, more imposing. His eyes, usually sharp, were clouded with anger and a terrible certainty. Alara, he boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing, the town has spoken. You are accused of witchcraft. Alara, who had been sitting by her fire, rose slowly. Her heart pounded, but she met his gaze with a surprising steadiness. Witchcraft? Silas, that's madness. I am a God-fearing woman. I mourn my husband. Silas scoffed, shaking his head. God-fearing? A witch would say such things. How else did you survive that storm, while stronger men perished? How else did Thomas fall? Unless you called upon dark forces. His words whipped through the air like cold lashes. The evidence is plain for all to see. You brought this evil upon us, upon Thomas. He gestured to the townsfolk behind him, who nodded gravely, their eyes filled with a chilling mix of fear and conviction. There is only one punishment for such a sin, Silas declared, his voice ringing with grim finality. You will be tried, and if found guilty, which you surely will be, you shall be hanged by the neck until dead. A gasp escaped Alara's lips. The world seemed to spin. Hanged? For surviving? The accusation, once a chilling whisper, had become a terrifying decree. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was an outcast, condemned by fear and superstition. They dragged her from her home, her pleas falling on deaf ears, and led her towards the small, rough-hewn jailhouse in the center of Haven. North of the border, in the crisp Canadian air, Sergeant Liam Vance of the Northwest Mounted Police sat in his small office. The scent of pine and strong coffee filled the room. He was a man of quiet strength, his uniform neat, his gaze steady. He had heard whispers of the harsh winter on the American side, the losses, the fear. Borders were just lines on a map, and human sorrow often crossed them freely. A trapper, a grizzled old man named Jed, came into Vance's office, stamping snow from his boots. Jed often shared news from both sides of the border, bits of gossip and serious happenings alike. He leaned in close, his voice low. "Sergeant, there's trouble brewing in Haven. That woman, Alara, Thomas's wife, they're saying she's a witch." Vance's steady gaze sharpened. "A witch? That's nonsense, Jed. Alara is a good woman, pious and kind." He knew Alara and Thomas well. They had often crossed into Canadian territory to trade, and Vance had shared many a cup of tea with them, listening to Thomas's hearty laughs and Alara's gentle stories. They were honest, hard-working folk, building a life together in a harsh land. "Silas Blackwood, he's got the town stirred up," Jed continued, shaking his head. "So she's to be tried, and if found guilty, hanged." A cold dread settled in Vance's stomach. Hanged? For surviving a blizzard? The injustice of it burned. Alara, a witch? It was unthinkable. He remembered her gentle eyes, her quiet strength. She was no witch, merely a survivor. The thought of her facing such a cruel fate, all because of ignorance and fear, was more than he could bear. His duty was to uphold the law, but sometimes true justice lay beyond the written rules. This was one of those times. Alara needed help, and he was perhaps the only one who could give it. Sergeant Vance stood by his office window, looking out at the endless white landscape. The news about Alara gnawed at him. He knew the laws, the strict boundary between Canada and the United States. As a Mountie, his oath was to uphold Canadian law and respect international borders. Crossing into American territory without official permission was a serious offense, one that could cost him his uniform, his career, and even land him in jail. But then he thought of Alara, of her gentle spirit, her quiet faith. He remembered Thomas, a man who would give his shirt off his back to a stranger. To think of Alara, a widow already heartbroken, now facing a rigged trial and a hangman's noose because of fearful gossip, it wasn't just wrong. It was a deep, burning injustice that went against every fiber of his being. His conscience screamed louder than any rule book. "They're going to hang an innocent woman, Jed," Vance said, turning back to the trapper, his voice tight. "For nothing more than fear and old wives' tales." Jed nodded sadly. "Aye, Silas Blackwood has them all scared. They need someone to blame for the harsh winter, for the ones they lost." Vance clenched his fists. The law was meant to protect the innocent, not condemn them based on superstition. If it didn't act, who would? The thought of Alara's last moments, alone and terrified, solidified his resolve. His duty to humanity, to a woman he knew was good, far outweighed the lines on a map or the rules of his uniform. He would go. He would cross the border. He would do whatever he could to save Alara, no matter the personal cost. The decision was made, a heavy burden, but one he accepted with a clear, determined heart. With his decision firm, Sergeant Vance began to prepare. He couldn't go in his Mountie uniform. That would draw too much attention and make his illegal crossing even more obvious. He changed into plain, sturdy winter clothes, dark and practical. He packed a few essentials: a warm blanket, some dried meat, a compass, and his trusty rifle, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. The last thing he wanted was more trouble. Under the cover of a moonless night, Vance saddled his horse, a dependable mare named Willow. The air was biting, sharp against his face, but he hardly noticed the cold. His mind was fixed on Alara and the urgent need to reach her. He rode east, towards the invisible line that marked the border. There were no fences or guards out here, just endless stretches of snow-covered land, silent and vast. The only sign of the border was a slight rise in the land and a few old, weathered marker posts that were often buried under snowdrifts. Vance knew the land like the back of his hand, having patrolled these remote areas for years. He slowed Willow as they approached the boundary, taking a deep breath. With each stride, he crossed not just a line on a map, but a line of duty, of law, and of personal safety. The wind whistled past his ears, a lonely sound in the dark. He felt the weight of his choice, the knowledge that every step deeper into American territory was a step further away from the rules that governed his life. He was now a trespasser, a Canadian officer operating outside his jurisdiction, all for the sake of a woman condemned by fear. The risk was enormous, but so was the injustice. He urged Willow forward, his gaze fixed on the faint glow of the distant settlement of Haven, a beacon of danger and desperation. Vance rode quietly into Haven under the cloak of darkness. The town was mostly asleep, a few dim lights flickering in windows. He found the small, rough-hewn jailhouse easily, a grim box of logs at the edge of the settlement. He dismounted Willow and tied her loosely to a nearby tree, telling her to stay put with a soft whisper. The jailhouse door was sturdy, but the single window, barred with thick iron, offered a glimpse inside. Vance peered through the frosty glass, his breath fogging the pane. In the dim light cast by a sputtering lantern, he saw her. Alara. She was huddled in a corner of the cell, her shoulders shaking, but her head was bowed in prayer. Her voice, though soft, carried a clear strength. Lord, I do not understand why this has happened. My heart aches for Thomas, and now for this injustice. But I trust in your plan, in your mercy. Grant me strength, or send a sign, a miracle to show your grace. Vance watched, his own heart aching for her. She looked thinner, her face pale with fear and cold, but her spirit, fueled by her deep faith, still burned bright. She wasn't begging for escape, but for understanding, for divine intervention. It was a testament to her unwavering belief, even when facing such a terrible fate. He tapped gently on the window bars. Alara startled, her head snapping up. Her eyes, wide with fear, slowly recognized him in the faint light. A flicker of hope, fragile but real, crossed her face. Sergeant Vance, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alara, he replied, keeping his voice low. I'm here. You're innocent, and I won't let them harm you. He could see the mix of terror and disbelief in her eyes, followed by a tear that traced a path down her cold cheek. His presence was perhaps the miracle she had been praying for, a flicker of light in her darkest hour. After reassuring Alara, Vance knew he couldn't just break her out without trying a more peaceful way first. He had to face Silas Blackwood. He found the town leader in his own cabin, a stern man with a fire crackling in his hearth, casting dancing shadows on his grim face. Vance, though not in uniform, introduced himself calmly. Silas, I've come about Alara, Vance began, choosing his words carefully. I know her and Thomas well. She is no witch. She is a kind, God-fearing woman. Silas snorted, slamming his fist on the table. You're a Canadian, meddling in our affairs. What do you know of our troubles? The blizzard took good men, and she, a frail woman, walks away unharmed? It's unnatural. Vance kept his voice even, trying to appeal to the man's sense of reason, however buried it might be. Sometimes Silas, Folks survive by luck, by grit, by God's grace, not by dark magic. Remember when Thomas's barn caught fire 2 winters ago? Alara was the one who rushed in, saving the calves, burning her hands in the process. Was that witchcraft or simply courage? He continued, painting a picture of the Alara he knew. By the time old Mrs. Gable fell ill, Alara sat by her side for a week, nursing her back to health, bringing her warm broth when no one else would. Is it the act of someone evil? She always had a kind word, a helping hand. She even patched up my own horse's leg once when it stumbled on a trail. Silas listened, his face unchanging, his eyes hard as flint. The stories, meant to show Alara's good heart, seemed to bounce off a wall of stubborn fear and sorrow. Vance could see that his words, logical and truthful as they were falling on deaf ears. Silas's belief in Alara's guilt was too deeply rooted, too tangled with his own pain and the town's panic. Reason alone would not set Alara free. Vance left Silas Blackwood's cabin feeling a deep frustration. His words, meant to bring clarity and truth, had been like drops of water on a hot stone, evaporating without effect. It wasn't just Silas. The whole town seemed to be caught in a terrible grip of fear and old stories. Later that morning, as the sun tried to peek through the lingering winter clouds, a makeshift trial began. It wasn't a real court, just a gathering in the town's small meeting hall. Alara was brought in, her eyes downcast, her shoulders slumped. Silas Blackwood stood before the gathered townsfolk, his voice booming as he listed the evidence against her. Her survival, Thomas's death, the strange twists of the storm. Vance stood quietly in the back, watching, listening. He saw the faces of the townsfolk, some wide-eyed with genuine terror, others narrowed with grim satisfaction. A few looked unsure, their gazes flicking between Alara's sorrowful face and Silas's angry one. He tried once more, stepping forward. "Folks, please listen," Vance called out, his voice strong and clear. "You're condemning an innocent woman based on fear. The blizzard was a natural disaster, a cruel twist of fate, not the work of evil." He reminded them of Alara's good deeds, her quiet faith, her years as a loyal neighbor. But his pleas were met with shouts and angry murmurs. "She fooled us all," one woman cried. "The devil can wear many faces," another added. Silas Blackwood silenced them with a raised hand, then turned his hardened gaze on Vance. "You're a stranger here, Mountie. You don't know the dark forces that walk this land. Alara has bewitched you, too, it seems," he declared, and a wave of agreement swept through the room. It was clear. Their minds were made up. Superstition had won. The trial was over before it truly began, and the verdict, hanging, was already decided in their hearts. Vance knew then that his only option was to act, and swiftly. The chilling pronouncement of Alara's guilt echoed in Vance's mind. There was no more time for talk, no more hope for reason. The town's fear had turned into a mob, and Alara's fate was sealed for the morning. He watched as they led her back to the jail, her steps heavy, her spirit surely crushed by the unfairness. Vance slipped away from the meeting hall, his mind racing. He had to act tonight, under the cloak of darkness. A daytime escape would be impossible, with too many eyes and too much risk. He needed a plan, a quick and silent one. He thought of the jailhouse, its sturdy door and barred window. He noticed a small, neglected shed behind the jail, perhaps holding old tools. That might be his way in, or at least a place to find something useful. His plan began to form. He would need to disable the lock, perhaps silently, and guide Alara out of the jailhouse. Then, they would have to move swiftly and quietly through the sleeping town, past any watchful eyes. He would have Willow ready, waiting at the edge of Haven, away from direct view. Their escape route would take them north, back towards the border, back to Canada, where Alara would be safe. The risks were immense. If caught, he would be arrested, perhaps even charged with interfering with justice in a foreign country. He could face years in prison, or worse. But looking at the moon, just beginning to peek from behind the clouds, Vance felt a fierce resolve. He wasn't just a Mountie anymore. He was a man fighting for what was right, for an innocent life. Alara's life. He would not fail her. The night was long and full of danger, but it was their only chance. As the night deepened, a heavy silence fell over Haven. Vance moved like a shadow. He found the tool shed behind the jail, its door secured with a rusty padlock. With a bit of clever manipulation and a sturdy rock, he managed to pry it open without much noise. Inside, among dusty shovels and broken barrels, he found a long, thin iron rod. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. He crept back to the jail cell window. Alara was awake, her face a pale oval in the darkness, watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. Vance worked carefully, inserting the iron rod through the bars and trying to jimmy the old, simple lock on the jail door from the inside. It was tricky work, cold and stiff, but he had practiced picking locks as part of his mounted training. Each scrape and click sounded terribly loud in the quiet night. Finally, with a soft thunk, the lock gave way. Vance gently pushed the heavy wooden door inward, creating a narrow opening. "Alara, quickly now," he whispered, extending his hand. She didn't hesitate. With a burst of courage she didn't know she had, Alara slipped through the opening, her movements quick and silent. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but the sight of Vance filled her with a new kind of strength. They moved stealthily through the sleeping town. Vance knew the layout well, having studied it earlier. They stuck to the shadows, avoiding the few cabins where a lamp still burned. The biting wind helped, muffling their footsteps on the hard-packed snow. Alara, though weak from fear and hunger, kept pace, her determination fueled by the promise of freedom. They reached the edge of town, where Willow waited patiently, a dark shape against the snow. Vance helped Alara onto the horse, then swung himself up behind her. With a soft nudge and a whispered command, Willow turned north, leaving the fear-ridden town of Haven behind. They were free for now, but the journey ahead was long and perilous. The cold embrace of the night gave way to a biting dawn as Vance and Alara rode north. The vast, snow-covered plains stretched endlessly, a beautiful but dangerous canvas. Alara shivered, not just from the cold that nipped at her exposed skin, but from the lingering fear. Vance kept them moving, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Their journey was hard. The deep snow made Willow's progress slow, and the bitter wind seemed to cut right through their clothes. Alara was weak from her time in the jail, and Vance worried about her strength. He shared his dried meat and what little water they had, trying to keep her spirits up with quiet words of encouragement. Just as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the snow, Vance spotted them. 3 riders, dark specks against the white, galloping hard from the direction of Haven. Silas Blackwood and 2 of his men, no doubt. They had discovered Alara's escape. "Hold tight, Alara," Vance murmured, urging Willow into a faster pace. He knew they couldn't outrun them forever in the deep snow, but he had to try. He glanced back. The riders were gaining. He could hear their shouts, faint but angry. He led Willow towards a cluster of thick pine trees, hoping the dense woods would offer some cover. The trees, heavy with snow, scratched at them as they passed. Vance pulled his rifle from its sheath, ready to defend Alara, but hoping it wouldn't come to that. He wasn't looking for a fight, only freedom. The chase was on, a desperate race against fear and injustice in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Every frozen branch, every icy gust of wind felt like another enemy. The chase was a brutal test of endurance. Silas and his men, fueled by anger and twisted righteousness, pressed them hard. Willow, despite her strength, was tiring in the deep snow. Alara, huddled in front of Vance, was growing weaker. Her body ached, her stomach growled, and the cold was seeping into her bones. There were moments when despair threatened to overwhelm her, moments when she wondered if it would be easier to just give up. But then, a quiet strength would rise within her. It was her faith, a deep and steady current that had seen her through the loss of Thomas and the terror of the accusation. She would close her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. She wasn't praying for magic, but for endurance, for guidance, for the strength to keep going. "We must keep moving, Sergeant," she'd whisper, her voice thin but firm. even when Vance saw the exhaustion in her eyes. God will guide us. Her unwavering belief became a beacon for Vance, too. When his own arms grew tired from holding the reins and scanning for danger, when the cold numbed his fingers and toes, Alara's quiet resolve reminded him why they were doing this. Her faith wasn't a fragile thing. It was a strong, unyielding force that pushed them forward. It was a testament to her pure heart, a heart that could not belong to any witch. As they ducked through another patch of woods, barely ahead of their pursuers, Alara looked up at the gray sky. "He brought us this far, Sergeant," she said, a hint of hope in her voice. "He won't abandon us now." Her words, simple and true, were like a warm ember in the harsh cold, giving Vance renewed courage to face the continuing dangers. As the pursuit continued, Vance felt the chill of the air, but also the burning heat of his conviction. He was a man of law, sworn to uphold order. Yet here he was, breaking every rule for a cause he believed in more deeply than any statute. His mounted training kicked in, sharp and clear. He knew how to survive in the wilderness, how to evade, how to protect. He used every trick he knew, guiding Willow through dense thickets and over frozen streams, making it hard for their pursuers to follow. Silas Blackwood and his men were relentless, their shouts echoing across the barren land. Vance knew they would not give up easily. He could have turned back, given Alara up to them, and returned to his safe, lawful life across the border. No one would have blamed him for following the rules. But the thought of Alara, innocent and unjustly condemned, spurred him on. "We're almost there, Alara," he said, his voice a steady comfort against the frantic beat of the chase. "Just a little further." He gripped the reins tighter, his eyes fixed on the distant, barely visible line of hills that marked the Canadian border. He was tired, cold, and hungry, and the fear of being caught was a heavy weight. But deeper than the fear was a strong sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Alara's life. It was about standing up for truth against ignorance, for justice against cruel superstition. His faith wasn't in a specific creed, but in the inherent goodness of people and the right to live free from unfounded fear. This belief, strong and unwavering, pushed him to keep fighting, to keep riding, no matter the personal cost. He would see Alara safe, or he would fall trying. Just as the sun began to dip below the western horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, Vance saw it. A familiar cluster of tall, distinctive pines that marked the Canadian border. He urged Willow forward with a final burst of energy. Behind them, Silas Blackwood and his men, now far behind and clearly exhausted, finally gave up the chase, their figures shrinking into the distance. A wave of relief, so strong it made Vance's shoulders slump, washed over him. He slowed Willow to a walk, then stopped just past the invisible line. Alara, trembling with cold and weariness, slid off the horse, her legs almost giving way. She fell to her knees in the snow, not from weakness, but in a silent, heartfelt prayer of thanks. Tears streamed down her face, tears of sorrow for all she had lost, but also tears of profound gratitude for the life she had been given back. Vance dismounted and helped her up, wrapping his own heavy coat tighter around her. "You're safe now, Alara," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "You're in Canada." She looked at him, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Sergeant Vance. You are my miracle." They had crossed more than just a border. They had crossed from a place of fear and old, dark beliefs into a land where kindness and truth held sway. Alara, once accused and condemned, now had a chance to build a new life, free from the shadow of unjust accusations. Vance, though he faced questions and consequences for his actions, knew in his heart that he had done what was right. His brave act, driven by a deep sense of justice and compassion, had shown that even in the darkest of times, human goodness and unwavering faith could overcome the cruelest of superstitions, offering redemption and a new beginning.